I have found that you have some people that lean into addressing conflict, but on the other side of that, there's also a number of people that are really conflict averse and would rather just choose to be passive. And why, in your experience, why have you found that to be true?
Yeah, I think some people just don't want to do the hard work of reconciliation, and sometimes it is easier to avoid than it is to confront. And other times, sometimes a person just wants to live within the context of their own truth, and that means, hey, I like my narrative, and whatever my narrative is, it's the true narrative, and I'm not looking to alter that, and therefore I will stay in the context of whatever my narrative is. So rather than seek resolution with whomever it is you have conflict, sometimes we'd rather believe the narrative we built. And that narrative may not be true, that narrative may not be necessarily valid, but it's also something that doesn't honor God, because God is a God of reconciliation. And not only is God a God of reconciliation, God mirrored and modeled reconciliation. When he wanted to reconcile with us, he made the first move. And so it's important to recognize conflict resolution often rests on whether or not you have the capacity to make the first move. And many people don't.
Hey, Style Crew. We are back for another episode of Style and Conversation. As I promised you all, we are continuing our series on conflict resolution. And I'm extremely excited about this topic because I think it's one of the things that is impacting relationships across the board, not just our intimate relationships, but familial relationships, professional relationships. We're constantly seeing and being flooded with videos all over social media with conflict resolution that should have gone a different way. I myself can use some of these tips. So I'm very excited to have our special guest today, Dr. Heyward. And as usual, I'm going to welcome him in by introducing him via his bio. Originally from New York, Dr. Heyward made Atlanta his home as he joined the church in 2003 as an assistant minister. In just 3 short years after his arrival, he was ordained as the evangelist of the Renaissance Church of Christ, formerly known as West End Church of Christ. His study of the Bible is constant. Having received his Master's of Arts in Theology, Master's of Arts in Biblical Studies, and later completing his doctorate degree in theological exegesis. I pray I did not murder that. His biblical expertise and understanding of the word is transformative and results in a unique learning experience. He works diligently to ensure accuracy in interpretation to build a foundation for proper application. His oratorical gift is noted throughout the word of Christendom. Blessed with the ability to reveal the truth as it appears in the Bible, his sermons have led thousands to be converted, choosing to put Christ in baptism. A healthy balance of sound doctrine and practical biblical application, Dr. Heyward delivers a recipe for spiritual success. As a result of his dedication, the Renaissance Church of Christ experiences continuous growth, numbering more than 2,000 current members. So, Style Crew, we want to welcome Dr. Heyward in for this conversation. As you heard from his bio, he is very qualified to have this conversation. So, welcome, Dr. Heyward.
Hey, good to be here, and thank you for having me on.
Of course, it's my pleasure. I just want to give the listeners some background as to how I came about you, your teachings, and your platform. I am a partner of the Faith Center in Tucker, Georgia, and I first heard you speak on this topic during the family conference in 2023, and it was a topic that really resonated with me. So when it came time to do this series, I just knew that I had to speak with you.
Oh, wow. Awesome. Well, I'm grateful. And of course, Pastor Vincent Campbell's a good friend. So that's awesome.
Yes. He and Lady C are the best. Yeah. So let's kick off our conversation. I want to ask you, so why is the topic of conflict resolution important to you? And how did you become well versed on this topic?
Well, it's important to me because part of human relationship
Mhm.
is the inevitability of conflict because we are different personalities with different thought processes and different backgrounds, and we come from different contexts.
Mhm.
But we must learn the art of doing conflict. I think you have to understand the process. So it's very important. Otherwise, you will live in broken relationships if you don't understand conflict resolution. And so I became well versed with it. I don't know how well versed I am because as much as I teach it, I still struggle with it like anybody else.
Mhm.
But biblically, there are many, many courses that I've had to take that deal with conflict passages or passages that deal with conflict resolution. And
Okay.
so, just through the process of biblical studies and studying interpretive processes, we run across passages that deal with the subject matter of conflict. And so, I've done a lot of seminars on that. I've done a myriad of workshops on conflict resolution. I do marriage counseling regularly, and so conflict resolution becomes part of what a pastor does.
I want to ask you, Dr. Hayward, because I've experienced this a few times in my adult life, in professional settings and personal settings. Um, why do you think that? I think, let me take a step back. I have found that you have some people that lean into addressing conflict, but on
Mm,
the other side of that, there's also a number of people that are really conflict averse and would rather just choose to be passive. And
yeah.
why in your experience, why have you found that to be true?
Yeah, I think some people just don't want to do the hard work
Mhm.
of reconciliation, and sometimes it is
Mm.
easier to avoid than it is to confront. And other times, sometimes a person just wants to live within the context of their own truth, and that means, hey, I like my narrative, and whatever my narrative is, it's the true narrative, and I'm not
Mhm.
looking to alter that. And therefore, I will stay in the context of whatever my narrative is. So rather than seek resolution with whomever it is you have conflict,
Mhm.
sometimes we'd rather believe the narrative we built. And that narrative may not be true, that narrative may not be necessarily valid, but it's also something that doesn't honor God because God is a God of reconciliation. And not only is God a God of reconciliation, God mirrored and modeled reconciliation. When he wanted to reconcile with us, he made the first move. And so it's important to recognize conflict resolution often rests on whether or not you have the capacity to make the first move. And many people don't, or choose not to be in that space.
Can you said something that when God wanted resolution with us, he made the first move. Can you expand on that and what you mean by that?
Yeah, the Bible says it is not that we first loved him, but that he first loved us. And so, God, when he wanted to save us, it was God that made the move to reconcile. Man disobeyed, but it's God's the one who said, let me offer a way back to me. So, God makes the first move. He models reconciliation. And the way he did it was that God said, you wronged me, but I'll make a way for you to come back to me. I'll make the first move. I'll create the path back. So in conflict resolution, it's about creating a path for the person to come back. It's about saying, I'm opening the pathway for us to be in a space where we can experience relationship again. And sometimes we block that if our goal is to elevate our feelings and to elevate our mindset, then sometimes we will dismiss God's will for our mindset or God's will for our feelings. So God's will and your feelings do not always go in the same direction.
Okay. So in that case, what should we be elevating in during conflict resolution if not our feelings?
Yeah, in conflict resolution, you want to, let me just say, you want to acknowledge your feelings. feelings. I think
Mm-hmm.
feelings is not that we dismiss those. We acknowledge our feelings, but we do not allow feelings to drive the car. Feelings are not what dictates direction. So ultimately, what you have to do is you elevate the will of God. You elevate what is God's character in this. What should be the character of God that I emulate? That's going to provide a way for reconciliation, which means even when I don't feel it, I do it. I do it because I'm surrendering to God and I'm making sure that I'm not operating according to the fabric of just my feelings. So feelings are never a sure way to make any critical decision
Mm-hmm.
because feelings can be valid but not true. So it's valid because I feel it. It's valid because some experience caused it, but what's the truth may not be what's necessarily valid to you. So it could be valid that you said something on this show that offended me,
Mm-hmm.
but it may not be true that it was your intent to offend me. So I have to begin to work through what's valid. My feelings are valid, but what's the truth? And sometimes the truth and your feelings are not in the same bucket.
Okay, we're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
We are getting somewhere.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, how do you define conflict resolution? Because we're talking about two large words individually and join. How do you define them?
Yeah, so conflict indicates that there's some area of tension. There is a
Mm-hmm.
wrong somewhere, or at least a perceived wrong.
Mm-hmm.
There's a perceived wrong that needs to be solved. And resolution really deals with reconciliation, which means two people coming back together. So we're resolving the tension, the thing that's creating a roadblock, the thing that's breaking relationship, the thing
Mm-hmm.
that's hindering relationship. We identify what that is, and then once you identify what it is, we are then resolving that, or we're bringing it to resolution, we're bringing it to conclusion so that we can resume relationship. The biblical concept is reconciliation. Reconciliation is a Bible word that means two people who are in a state of enemy coming back together. That's reconciliation, and we're going to always need that. Now some things are, again, I want to highlight, is perceived, I would say perceived conflict, or perceived, there's a perceived obstacle. Sometimes you'll be surprised how a conversation will indicate that the problem actually wasn't real. It was a misunderstanding. So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, but if you rest in your head that my narrative is true and my narrative's right, and you never ask, you never get to the truth. It may be there is no real problem, but you
Mm-hmm.
have. But the only way you get there is by actually confronting each other, actually having a
Mm-hmm.
moment to say, "Hey, I feel I was wrong by you when this happened. I'd like to talk through that." And sometimes by the time you talk through it, you're like, wait a minute, there wasn't a problem at all. I kind of just misunderstood that. So
Mm-hmm.
that can happen. You'll never get there if you're not willing to have confrontation. You got to have a confrontation.
So, for anyone that's listening to the audio recording of this, not the video, I'm smiling because I just experienced this with a close girlfriend a couple of weeks ago.
Mm.
She had shared some news with me that she was planning to move, and she had been, obviously I'm gonna miss my girlfriend. She's I was really excited when I moved here that we would be in the same vicinity, but she had always been talking about relocating to this place. So I was aware that this could happen at some point. So when she shared it with me, I made the decision to not center myself at that moment. And I just told her, I said, well, friend, I'm really excited for you.
Mm.
I trust that you're making the best decision. Please let me know how I can support you and if there's going to be a going away celebration.
Mm.
And because she had had a conversation leading up to telling me where the reception wasn't supportive, this person was very upset and said that she's moving, she lumped me into that. So
Mm.
we were having a conversation a week later, and I could tell the energy was off when we first got on the phone.
Mm.
And what she mentioned, she said, I don't know if it's just me, but it just felt a little weird when you said XYZ. And, I've been telling people I'm going to move. And I heard her out and I said, friend, I'm really glad you brought this to me
Mm.
because that's not at all what I meant. I really was just trying to be supportive. I said, obviously, I'm sad you're leaving, but I made it a point to leave that out of our conversation because you don't need that right now. Moving in itself is, you have to figure out logistics. You have added costs to your budget that month. And the interesting thing is, this friend and I'm not combative, but I am someone that likes to deal with issues head on. Whereas this person previously had been more avoidant. So to see us at this state in our relationship, it was very interesting to arrive at that point. And I just really appreciated the growth that we've gotten to. So I say that to say it was a complete misunderstanding, and I'm glad we address it instead of allowing it to sit in different narratives to form that were completely not true. And then space happens and all those things. So with that, I want to ask you, leading from that quick story, why is conflict imperative for the success of a relationship? And I know that question may seem contradictory to people who are used to hearing they have a negative connotation of conflict, but why do you think it's important for the success of any relationship?
Yeah, conflict, depending on how you define it, every relationship will have conflict. And then there is the willingness to engage it.
Okay.
So without relational health, I mean, if you want relational health, that's a better way to say it. You have to be willing to engage conflict. And that means, proverbially, it means not trying to sidestep all the elephants in the room. You know, it's being willing to confront the elephants when they happen. So, you know, in order to really embrace conflict resolution, reason is necessary is because you must address when obstacles arise. You have to address when feelings arise. You have to address when a perception arises, because it allows us to maintain a relationship with a clear path. You know, there's a lot of times when you know, you're on the road, and praise God, you got to be willing to remove some of the obstacles as you're moving. And it's important to say, oh, let me get this out of the way. Let me get this out of the way. Let me clear my path. That's what relationships are about. Relationships are about continuously removing the rubble that's in the middle of the path. Like, I have to continue to move things. And you got to engage that process in order for you to have a clear path to travel. So that's how we maintain our streets and our highways. There's always somebody that has to fix a pothole. Thank God for the people who fix streets and make sure that when potholes are created, it gets filled up, you know, because they have to make sure that people can have a path to drive. What if nobody ever tended to our streets? How many people be on the side of the road with messed up tires and everything else? You have to have the capacity to engage what is in the middle of the road that's blocking our ability to have free travel. So for me, conflict resolution, you got to engage it. You got to want to engage it. Otherwise, you will create the most elaborate movies in your mind. And those movies may not actually be happening. We will paint pictures and we will paint portraits in our head because we didn't want to engage conflict. Better to just engage the conflict. So for me, it's crucial if you're trying to do a relationship. You can't do it without it. Nobody's done it outside of their family. When you grew up with your mom and your dad and your siblings, there's conflict. It happens, and you engage it. And when you engage it, it should pull people closer together. So yes, it's crucial, very important.
So something else that I'm hearing from what you're saying, because I agree completely, but I have heard a narrative from certain people when they're new to a dating relationship, or they may have certain ideologies around romance and love. The thought process where, oh, we've never had a fight, or we don't fight. Okay, well, you immediately laugh. So I mean, I think we're on the same page with this. But my question to you is, what wisdom can you share with those people who think they have that narrative that that's a good thing, that they have never encountered any type of conflict with their partner, whatever the case may be? What's up, Style Crew? I am holding in my hand the 5-minute journal which is an item from one of the newest sponsors of season 2 of Style and Conversation, from a company called Intelligent Change. And if you haven't heard about them, you are going to be so excited once I tell you more. I first heard about them by attending an event here in Atlanta. I received the 5 Minute Journal in a swag bag. And let me just tell you, this aligns perfectly with this series that we're currently in. And the reason is that this 5 Minute Journal includes so many things to help keep you on track daily, weekly, monthly, and then beyond the year. For example, on one of the pages, they have an option to complete fitness and meals, your meal plans for the week. In addition to this, they also have something to help you be really intentional. So one of the questions is, my intention for the week is. And then it goes even further to say how I'll motivate myself, create any notes. And then they also have various wisdom quotes throughout the journal as well. One of them being, reading is to the mind what exercise is to the body, by Joseph Addison. So they also have a page where you can review your mood for the day, talk about what you're grateful for, all the things that you'll do for your well-being and health, and so on and so forth. And so, like I said, I really love this because it helps you to be a lot more intentional, which is something that we've spoken about on one of the episodes from this series. And this is just a great way to really implement and continue to execute on those changes that we all said that we plan to make at the beginning of the year, and a way to hold ourselves accountable as we continue to move through 2025 and beyond. So, as a listener of Style and Conversation, I have a special code for 10% off for you, which is Styled by Jess. That code is STYLEDBYJESS. And to tell you a little bit more about Intelligent Change, they pride themselves on creating elevated, thoughtfully designed products to help you realize your potential and live a happier, more fulfilling life. In addition to this, they have journals, they have digital downloads, they have mindful affirmation cards, games, and then they also have games for kids. And so this code can be applied for each of those products. Again, that code is STYLEDBYJESS. So I want to encourage you all to check out Intelligent Change and look into this 5-minute journal as a way to get started, and all of their other wonderful products. All right, let's jump back into this episode.
So I can respect the idea that we never fight, but not fighting doesn't mean you haven't had conflict. So yeah, maybe you're not. And I think when people say fight, they mean very high, tense, yelling matches, anger. Maybe you're a couple that you have a great temperament and you don't have that. That's good. But to say there's no conflict's not true. There will always be a moment of disagreement where you're working through that. And some people may have the temperament where they don't yell, they don't get boisterous, they don't become loud, they don't let anger get the best of them. That's good. But to say no conflict, I think, is completely erroneous. You will always have a place of disagreement. If there is a couple raising children, you will have a moment when you disagree on how the child should be disciplined, how the child should grow up, or what school should they go to. I mean, you'll always have these moments of conflict. You'll have conflict over family style, like how I did family growing up may not be how you did family growing up. And sometimes we got to work through conflict. Conflict doesn't have to be toxic. So I think that's the important thing to recognize. Conflict doesn't have to be toxic. It doesn't have to be where two people are malicious. It doesn't have to be where two people are, you can't talk through those moments of disagreement. I think it raises a bigger issue if two people can't do communication, because communication is necessary to do a conflict. So if you can't do communication, now there's another problem, there's another layer. So you got to be able to communicate in order to do conflict, and there is a necessity for healthy communication.
So let's take a step back because you just raised a really valid point. What are some indicators that, as two individuals, there's a breakdown in communication or there's no solid foundation?
Yeah. So breakdown in communication happens when one ceases to respect the perspective of the other. So communication becomes difficult when my perspective is the only one. So the moment I get to a space where my perspective is concrete, right, and I don't leave room for other perspective, then it hinders communication, because communication is a reciprocal exchange. Now, if my perspective is disrespected, disregarded, and if yours is the only perspective that is considered right, healthy, and norm, or whatever the case is, it makes communication hard, because now somebody within that communication is going to feel dismissed. And see, and when you dismiss the person, now you created a bottleneck where communication is no longer reciprocal. Communication is now looked at as one-sided, and when communication gets one-sided, now it creates a frustration where somebody might retreat. Somebody might say, "I don't want to communicate." Person might say, look, I'm not trying to be in a space to have this conversation, because they feel disregarded, they feel disrespected, they feel dismissed. So communication breaks down at the moment a person becomes fixated only on their perspective. You have to come to any communication with the possibility that you're wrong. Now, if you don't come with the possibility you're wrong, then you have already fixed it where communication is going to be a one-way dynamic.
I've been guilty of that. I'll raise my hand and be accountable. I've definitely been guilty of that. And as I'm getting older, it's something that I have to consciously work on. My perspective is not the only perspective in this scenario. So that's good. I've never heard it put that way. That's really good.
Yeah,
Really
yeah.
very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's a key. It's important. It cannot be one way. It cannot be that your thinking is as authoritative as the Bible. Like it just can't be that way. You have to leave room that you're fallible. You have to leave room that, okay, I missed, or maybe I've missed here, and this communication is going to reveal where I missed. When that ceases, there's no communication.
So something else that cannot be one way in this scenario, resolution. Something else that I'm learning is that resolution can be different for each person. What have you found to be different resolution styles, or is there such a thing where that exists in terms of conflict resolution?
Yeah, that's a good question. I believe there's probably different vantage points by which people look at resolution. I think resolution for some can be, what is bringing this to conclusion for me? This is why I think the other word that you involve in this is reconciliation. See, resolution can mean I came to a conclusion for me, and I'm done, and I'm satisfied with the conclusion for me. It may not be that the resolution is reconciliation. So if all I'm looking for is resolution, then resolution can become personal, subjective, and self-centered.
Okay.
So conflict resolution can mean the conflict or tension has been resolved in my mind for me according to my personal satisfaction, that may not lend toward mending relationship.
I agree with that.
But you can't say reconciliation and not say relationship mending. So reconciliation is a different word. Resolution, of course, in an ideal world, should be reconciliation. That's what it should be. That we're resolving this where relationship is restored. That's the Bible thing you want to do. But if my concept of resolution is I'm okay with the fact that we talked. I
Mm-hmm.
don't agree with you, and I really don't need to speak to you ever again. That's a resolution,
Okay.
but it's not a reconciliation. So,
Oh.
right, it's a resolution. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we've resolved, but we may not have reconciled. So, I would say, if I was talking to a married couple, I would
Mm-hmm.
say conflict resolution must always be, should be conflict reconciliation. That
Okay.
the goal is that we're fixing relationship. That should be the goal. Um,
Okay.
so conflict resolution is a good phrase, but I think what we need to hear in that is that some people can convolute the idea of resolution, and
Yes.
they can have a really different concept of that, and it may not lend toward I'm trying to fix relationship. Man, so very important for us to kind of make sure resolution doesn't become subjective. That is,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't need to be resolution for me is one thing, but is
Mm-hmm.
absent and apart from reconciliation. I don't think that's the ideal biblical way of viewing it. Yeah,
No, I appreciate you for really going deeper on that and differentiating.
yeah, yeah.
Are there married couples aside, because I
Yep.
don't speak on married folks' business. Um, do you, in your experience, are there indicators where the focus should not be reconciliation?
Mm. Oh wow, that's good. That's a good.
Again, I said married folks
Yeah,
aside
yeah,
because
yeah. Wow, it's a good question. Um, that's the first time I've ever been asked that. That's really good.
ah,
That's a good one. I can't think of a space where reconciliation is not the goal.
mm-hmm.
However, depending on the situation, it may be a reconciliation with boundaries.
Okay, that's good.
So let me give what came to my mind as physical abuse,
Okay.
where a person may be, repentant for what they've done to you physically,
Mm-hmm.
but a person may have to create boundaries for safety. So I may forgive you and restore relationship, but it's not relationship without boundaries. Um,
Okay.
um, so I do think there are spaces where um, reconciliation is always the restoration of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say, depending on the context, there may be the need for certain boundaries to be established in order for the relationship to be healthy. But the goal is never not mending relationship, not biblically. It's not that. So now, does reconciliation sometimes take time? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's not. Sometimes people have to work through some emotional things. Sometimes people got to work through some forgiveness. It's
Mm-hmm.
sometimes a process. Um, Sometimes it's not popcorn, instant popcorn. Sometimes people
Right.
got to sit in it for a minute. They got to think through it. That kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. So I would say sometimes conflict resolution can be a process.
Mm-hmm.
Reconciliation can be a process, and sometimes you got to give space for that. And that's not always easy. Not always easy to do.
That's that's very wise. Sometimes it takes space because
Hmm.
I understand that's not always easy from the other person who has the desire for reconciliation in the immediate.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
So, my next question for you. In the case where problems go unresolved, what results does that then yield for a relationship?
Whew. Well, if problems go unresolved,
Mm-hmm.
um, which means unaddressed,
Mm-hmm.
they can fester, where there is a delayed explosion.
Okay.
Meaning, if a person internalizes,
Okay.
and they never communicate what they're internalizing, and they hold it within the context of their spirit,
Okay.
then what happens is that it can harm a relationship because there has been something festering within a person's spirit or mind that was left unaddressed, which means it has had time to evolve into maybe more than what even happened. So if I leave something unaddressed, then it begins to take on a life of its own. What I'm actually doing by not addressing it is I'm feeding it.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing that you're not addressing is becoming pregnant. It's growing, it's evolving. So by the time you do get to a space where you can't hold it anymore, it creates bitterness, resentment, and it creates it can create a sense of um, uh, barrier. It can create checkout. It can create um, man, really deep-seated hurt. It can create numbness. It can create disconnect because this person has something in their spirit that has been there, but never truly resolved. And they get to a space where by the time it comes out, especially if the other person is unaware,
Mm-hmm.
now the other person is trying to figure out what's happening,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't know what's happening, but what's actually taking place is the birthing of the fruit of unresolved conflict. And now you have a different path of work to do in order to get through that, because now you got a situation where you got to deal with the fruit of something that's been planted a long time ago, never addressed. Now you're not cutting a branch, you're trying to cut a tree. At one point it was a twig, but now it's a full grown tree. It's got a lot of fruits on it. So what may have been something resolved quicker
Mm-hmm.
will now take longer because it was never addressed. And that can be a tough, painful process, very painful. I am familiar with that.
Yeah, I imagine, especially because you just said something that resonated with me when conflict problems rather go unresolved, and then the person that has been on the receiving end and has been burying that hurt, when they finally do release it because it has nowhere else to go, it leaves the person on the receiving end
Oh yeah,
just
yeah,
flabbergasted, like what just
yeah,
happened.
yeah.
So you're not only are you trying to resolve with what just happened, now you're really having to peel back late, that could be years,
Oh,
months
man. Yeah.
of hurt.
Yeah, it can take a long time to get through that because
Mhm,
and then like you said, you're absolutely right. The person who is on the other side who didn't know or didn't recognize what was there and for how long it was there,
mhm,
um, they get into a hysteria of what's happening. It's out of nowhere. It's dropped out of the clouds. Hasn't really dropped out of the clouds. It's been in that person's spirit, but you didn't know it. And
mhm,
as a result, you now have to deal with layers that have been created over years of things that need to be unfolded, and that can be an arduous process. I mean, it can be highly difficult, and it becomes a process of trying to heal.
mhm,
The person who doesn't, the person who's finding out what was sitting in there all that time, maybe something they caused, they
mhm,
did, and they may have thought it was resolved, but it's not resolved.
mhm,
Now they got to sit in that where because that person is not going to get better tomorrow or next week. It's going to take time, and you got to sit in that, and you got to be humble enough to take some things. I mean, it can be hard. It could be, and then it becomes the willingness of that person to sit in that. Are they willing to sit in that? So there's a lot of things that happens here that can be difficult, when you're talking about unresolved conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's a process. Married couples go through it,
Mm-hmm.
where a person could have experienced hurt,
Mm-hmm.
but that hurt was never really fully resolved, and then as a result, now there's an explosion. It comes out of nowhere, and it's not that it's not valid though, because it's that person's feelings and
Mm-hmm.
it's that person's experience. But this is the danger of suspending healthy communication. That's the danger. If a relationship is going to have health, it
Mm-hmm.
must have consistent and constant communication. And it's got to be a safe space to be able to communicate freely, where two people can disagree, but it doesn't create a divide. That's important in a relationship. Because if you don't do that, if you don't have an open reservoir of communication, then you got those things that fester, you got things that sit there. And when I say communicate, I mean both sides, like both
Mm-hmm.
people have to be committed to the communication process. You got to be. You can't sidestep communication. You got to be able to talk through it. You got to be able to see, okay, how did I get here? What
Mm-hmm.
what caused it? How do we resolve what caused it? So communication must also be intentional.
Okay.
Intentional from the perspective that we're not just communicating, we communicate toward resolution, toward reconciliation. It's not just going to be a talk out, just I'm going to say what I feel, this person
Mm-hmm.
says what they feel, and then we just leave it in the open air. No, it's we communicate toward intentionality of how are we going to resolve, how are we going to reconcile, how do we get healthy again. So communication cannot be without direction. It's got to have direction. Otherwise, it's fruitless, because it's communication, but it's communication going in a bunch of different directions, and nothing is ever resolved.
So you said something towards the end that was very important. Communication with direction.
Mhm.
How do you determine the direction for your communication?
That's good. So this is where, for me, a God perspective is important.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think the two people should ever determine the
Mm-hmm.
direction. I think if you are a God-centered, God-fearing person, you let God determine the direction.
Mm-hmm.
You submit and surrender to His will. You want to manifest His character, and
Mm-hmm.
you want to determine that the goal of relationship is always reconciliation. And I got to be willing. I think a lot of times we want to dismiss God from
Mm-hmm.
what is His property. His
Yeah.
property is reconciliation. His
Yeah.
property is conflict resolution. So because we live in such a me culture, the me
Uh-huh.
culture wants to say, well, these are the stipulations for how we are going to do this, and this is the direction we want to go. Wait a minute. Where does God factor?
Mm-hmm.
How does God factor in the thinking? How does He factor in the direction?
Mm-hmm.
Without that, you are left with a very humanistic approach
Mm-hmm.
to relationships. So even relationship is not yours. That's God's. God created relationship. That's when He created the human family, He by default creates relationship dynamic. He creates community. We gotta always recognize none of this is our property. Community is not my
Mm-hmm.
property. Family is not my property. Marriage is not my property. None of that's my property. So when I do relationship, I got to do it according to the thing. I got to do it according to the manual that the owner provided, and say He's the one that guides how relationship moves. So my thing is, if you're going to come to the table of doing relationship,
Mm-hmm.
we got to talk to the dude who created it. We got to talk to God. We got to talk to the one who said,
Mm-hmm.
this is how this works.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we break it and
Boss.
we destroy it.
Amen to that one. Okay. So I just have two more questions for you before we close out.
Okay.
Um, what advice would you offer a couple or individuals, may not be a couple, it could be any type of relationship, professional, friendship, where they are knee deep in damage, some wounds. Let's just say that bottleneck was created and now the top was released and
Right, right.
they're trying to figure out where to go from there. What advice would you offer them?
Well, my advice is one, always acknowledge what are your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing you want to do when you acknowledge what you're feeling, then you want to move to step two, which I believe is assessing whether or not my feelings are true.
Mm-hmm.
How much of my feelings is fabricated, and how much of my feelings is based on truth.
Mm-hmm.
Once you do that, then you want to move to that your ultimate responsibility when you are wrong is to find your way to the cross where you can exercise forgiveness. You have to get to a space where I get to a point where I'm willing to release the wrong done.
Mm-hmm.
Because you don't want to be enslaved or in bondage to a feeling of unforgiveness. You have
Mm-hmm.
to get to the point where you're there. And I'm not waiting for the person to even ask me for forgiveness. I'm making forgiveness available. It's there. I've released it already. And when they come to their realization, I'm giving it. That's you have to practice a very available forgiveness.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is to engage with the person that has wronged you. These wherever these wounds have come from, you want to engage it. You want to get this person in a space where you can talk through it, so that you can have what I call experiential healing. That means my healing is going to come from God first and
Mm-hmm.
foremost. But I also can get an experiential healing by the fact that I was able to talk through it with the person.
Mm-hmm.
Want to give yourself the opportunity to experience healing with the person. That may work, it may not. So that's going to depend on the person, of course, that you talk to. So healing is ultimately from God. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where I'm going to heal. But if you're wanting an experiential moment with your healing, sometimes it's good to engage in conversation with the person who has wounded you. So you have to address your wounds. You have to address where you've been hurt. Um, but you want to address it in a way that's not toxic. You can't, man, you cannot be a person that is victimized by your wounds. You can't become a person where the wounds are actually the thing that's dictating your direction or dictating where you go. You can't you can't lead life from the perspective of letting pain drive. So you can't. You got to get to a place where I'm going to resolve what I feel,
Mm-hmm.
so that I'm not driven by what I feel. Uh,
Okay.
so very important not to be toxic in how you go about your healing. So toxic would be, well, the way I'm gonna heal is I'm just gonna make sure I get this person back, and then I'm gonna be okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna heal because I'm gonna make sure this person feels everything they did to me. That's toxic. I'm going to heal by making sure that whenever this person sees me, they will get the cold shoulder. I'm not going to talk to them. I'll make sure they know that they're going to be clear about how I feel about them. It's toxic. So if your healing is a get back kind of healing, it's toxic, and it's not real healing. Um, so very important to recognize I need to go through my healing process in a healthy way. You can't do that without God.
I got nothing else. I feel like you tied it up with clear instructions,
It's,
and thank you.
you
So my last question, I like to close out by asking my guests one style related question because we are style and conversation. So we recently just had the annual Met Gala. It took place last Monday.
mm,
And the theme this year was super fine tailoring Black style. And the purpose of this was in celebration of Black dandyism.
okay.
So I want to take the opportunity to ask you, what is modern dandyism to you, and how does
Mm.
that show up in your own style?
Modern dateism.
Dandyism.
Dandyism.
Yeah.
Define that for me. I don't know if I've ever heard that.
Okay. So think about, honestly, and I love that the theme was tied to Black people this year, because honestly, when I think of Black dandyism,
Mm,
I think of Black men
mm,
in the 60s, 70s, like their Sunday morning
Okay.
church style, like the suit, the hat, the suits, very tailored, very bold with the
Mm,
prints and the
okay.
colors and the ascots and all the
Ah, okay.
things. Mm-hmm.
Got it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so how do I feel about that style?
Yes, yes. So how do you in a modern
Right, right.
time,
Okay.
how does that show up in your style? How do
Yeah,
you represent modern dandyism?
yeah. I don't know. I think so I am definitely on occasion a suit tie,
Mm-hmm.
handkerchief kind of guy. I love to
Mm-hmm.
put together a
Mm-hmm.
nice look. Uh,
Okay.
I think that's important. I think what that does in terms of, well, how it shows up for me is I like to um, portray what I feel. So if I dress that way, I'm dressing that way because typically I believe how you dress makes a statement. I think it's all part of the messaging of who you are.
Mm-hmm.
So part of your messaging is not just what comes out of your mouth, but in a given context is what you're communicating before you even speak. So
Okay.
for me, it shows up all the time with me when I go into various contexts. I like to make sure that I represent the level of confidence that I feel. So at church, of course, on a given Sunday, I wear a suit and tie like that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I don't, though. Sometimes I wear Timberlands and
Mm-hmm.
jeans and I wear some stylish thing because I
Mm-hmm.
want people to see that Renaissance is a space for every context. It's a space for
Mm-hmm.
whatever your cultural style is. But in whatever way you express yourself, you want to express yourself in a way that's reflective of character,
Mm-hmm.
confidence, love for God, respect for yourself. You want to make sure that's what you exude. So for me, that's how it shows up in my world. I can remember there was a time when I was very big into suits. The cufflinks,
Mm-hmm.
I had big cufflinks, like huge. They almost covered my whole wrist. I was big in ascots and that kind of
Okay.
younger year. That then, as I evolved, I started realizing dressing that way only spoke to a certain constituent. And there was a whole young generation that I was missing because I used a very classic kind of dressing. And so I began to blend my dressing where I began to wear what was consistent with a younger culture. So that they can understand you can still be vibrant, intelligent, and exuberant, and I can still preach with high intelligence and have on Timberlands. I can
Mm-hmm.
still break down the Greek and Hebrew text and have on a chain with a lion on it. It's okay. I can have earrings in my ear and
Mm-hmm.
still be highly intelligent and still be a person that's oratorically gifted. So I believe you want to show versatility, that
Mm-hmm.
there is a way that you dress to always magnify character and confidence, but at the same time, let people know that I don't show up one way. I can show up various
Mm-hmm.
ways. And so that's how it shows up in my life. I believe in that philosophically. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so, me on a given Sunday morning, there's no telling what I'm gonna wear.
Okay.
Try to predict it because I'm gonna dress the way according to what I want to exude in that moment.
I love that. It seems that you are very versatile and intentional with your style.
Mhm.
So I like
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, with that being said, this is your time to share with the listeners any upcoming projects that you'd like to highlight, where we can find you, how we can support you, all the things. This is your time before we close
Okay.
out.
Well, I want to first thank you so much for having me, Jessica. I've enjoyed this very much. Appreciate the dialogue. You can reach me various ways. One of the things I just launched is called the OJH Next Level Training Programs. You can check that out at ojhnextlevel.com. And it is a church growth and development training. It trains ministers, it trains church leaders, it trains lay people in discipleship. So it's a subscription program where you get to have me walk alongside you as a coach, and I kind of help you deepen your discipleship. Or for ministers, I help you craft powerful sermons. I help you understand church administration. Or if you're a leader, I help you understand leadership strategies. So those are the three lions dens, as we call them. that you can join. You can become a subscriber, and there are courses that'll be uploaded. So we're launching that now. It just opened, in fact, today. And so that's open and ready. Every year I do a conference called the Nehemiah Summit. And the Nehemiah Summit is November 12th through the 14th. Again, if you're interested in church growth and development, trying to figure out how to do ministry in a more effective way, trying to figure out how to find your giftedness, this conference is for you. That's what it's about. So it'll be at the Renaissance Church of Christ. That's where I minister, at 3675 Butner Road, Atlanta, Georgia. And that's where you can find me.
Well, Dr. Heyward, I will be sure to have all of that linked in the episode bio for the listeners to find you and continue to support you. Thank you so much for your willingness to share your wisdom on this episode. I know it's going to resonate with so many, and I appreciate you. And for that, Style Crew, we are out until we continue this series and wrap it up next Thursday. Hey, Style Crew, make sure you're keeping up with our podcast through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, as well as the Podcast Index. And if you'd like to view the podcast visually, check out my YouTube channel, Styled by Jessica Lawrence.